Hey guys, before we get into today's video, first I want to thank our sponsors at NordVPN. Get a huge 75% off by going to nordvpn.com/censoredgaming or check out the link in the description. Why might you want to check it out? Well, NordVPN allows you to surf the web as if you were located in any country, meaning you can bypass things like filters and regional restrictions. It also keeps all of your internet data secure, meaning you're kept safe when browsing, and NordVPN is also one of the few companies that have a strict no data logging policy. It's available for mobile as well as PC, and it's been consistently voted the best VPN service around. So again, you can get a huge 75% off by going to nordvpn.com/censoredgaming or by checking out the link in the description. And even more, get one extra month for free by using the code censoredgaming at checkout. When Metal Gear Solid released in 1998, it was met with universal acclaim all around the world, and swiftly made its way to be widely regarded as one of the most popular video games of all time, a honour that the title still holds now, over 20 years later. One aspect of the game that critics have especially praised is the title's gripping story, characters, and overall world that the game takes place in. But did you know that behind the scenes, Metal Gear Solid 1's English translation has actually been a pretty controversial topic, and even led to the game being completely retranslated for the Nintendo GameCube Twin Snakes remake. The game's localizer has spoke in depth about this subject last month in a self-written article published on the website Polygon. Jeremy Blaustein is the localizer responsible for many popular games released in the 90s and early 2000s, including Castlevania Symphony of the Night and Silent Hill 2-4. Before being hired for Metal Gear, Blaustein already had a history of working for series creator Hideo Kojima, with him helping as the localization supervisor on Snatcher. In the article, Blaustein recalls the great difficulties he experienced translating the game for Western audiences. The scope of the game was massive, and he also explains how the state of video game localization back then was barely in its infancy. There were hardly any frames of reference in other works for him to use to help him, and there was of course no Wikipedia, Reddit or YouTube. He recalls how he worked from home in a tiny office for 8 months whilst his kids played and cried 3 feet away, and this was under a contract that wouldn't see him paid until the job was fully complete, meaning money was a huge issue. The stress had him on diazepam, which is also ironically the same drug that Snake can take during the game to help him stop his hands from shaking whilst aiming. However, despite these conditions, Blaustein felt great inspiration in that he was working on something special, and was determined to see the job through and make it perfect. Localization is by no means an easy task though. Kojima is a celebrated writer, but his works are by no means simple, often combining complex subjects such as social issues, politics, psychology, philosophy, science, and pretty much any other subjects you can think of thrown into the mix. The Japanese language is inherently vastly different to English. For instance, the sentence structure in Japanese is the complete opposite of English, and then you combine this with the cinematic nature of the game and the dramatic cutscenes that have to sync up perfectly with what is being spoken. Alongside these issues, Blaustein felt, as he still feels, that localization should be more than just translation. He wanted to try and capture the same meaning and feeling that he believed Kojima was aiming for, but to do that for Western audiences he felt some tweaks were necessary. This led to some changes to terms and dialogue under the impression that this would help it all sound more natural and how the actual soldiers would sound. For example, in the Japanese version there is no codec, which is now a term that is synonymous with this series and its wireless method of communication used by Snake and his allies. Instead, the Japanese version simply calls this musenki. This would translate into English to the much less imaginative wireless transceiver, but Blaustein had come across the term codec and thought it would fit the tone of the game well, and so put it in. This is also the case for the term OSP, or on-site procurement, where weapons and items must be acquired from within the enemy base due to not wanting to leave any trace. This isn't real military jargon, but Blaustein felt it sounded official. The Japanese version, however, simply calls this Genchi Chotatsu, which could be translated into acquiring locally. Not wanting things to feel too stiff for US audiences, Blaustein also added or tweaked little bits of dialogue here and there too. In the original, Campbell early says to Snake, "I'm not a colonel anymore," whilst in Blaustein's English translation he says, "I'm not a colonel anymore, just a retired old warhorse." When the job was complete though, Blaustein expresses that he really felt he did a good job on it, and he tried his best to stay in the mind of Kojima as much as possible. Then this sentiment was reiterated back by the team at Konami, and even Kojima himself, when it was all shipped back to Japan. In fact, Kojima liked it so much that when it came time for a special Japanese early the re-release version of the game, dubbed Metal Gear Solid Integral, he wanted to include the English voice track in it. This version of the game adds various updates and bonuses and only contains the English voices with Japanese text. This is a very unusual situation for a game's English translation to be later put in, and it was with this where all the problems appeared. You see, when Kojima and his team started to go through the game line by line and matching the Japanese text with the voices, the differences started to become made apparent. Kojima, who is widely regarded as being a video game auteur, wasn't happy that his work had been changed around, and it was here where it was clear that he wanted a very direct literal translation. So Kojima was then put in a position where he had to retranslate Blaustein's dialogue back into Japanese for the integral version. Kojima then severed all ties with Blaustein, and all future games in the series would be translated much more word for word to the Japanese original. Also, like mentioned earlier, for the GameCube Twin Snakes remake, the English translation, including the voice acting, was redone to make it more faithful. In the remake, Snake says, "I'm just a guy who can only find meaning on the battlefield." In Blaustein's version though, this was tweaked with him instead saying, "I'm just a man who's good at what he does, killing." Whilst normally the meaning would largely stay intact, sometimes there would be more subtle meaning in Kojima's original words that could be lost. Another example from the remake is during Psycho Mantis' death scene, where his last words in the Japanese version and the more faithful remake are, "This is the first time I've ever used my power to help someone. It's strange, such a nostalgic feeling." Blaustein felt that nostalgic was a bit of an odd term for English players, and so his version changed this to "it feels kind of nice." However, Kojima intended on using the term nostalgic specifically due to it being a reference to Mantis' mother, who died whilst giving birth to him, and this meaning wasn't conveyed in the English version. The article ends with Blaustein saying, "Looking back on the whole thing, yes, there were mistakes and bad choices as well as successful ones, but that's art. Translation isn't science, and after 20 years of Metal Gear Solid success, I think I must have done a pretty good job." But what do you think about the original Metal Gear Solid's translation and the points discussed in today's video? As always, please let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and a big thanks to NordVPN again for sponsoring today's video. There will be a link in the description if you want to go check their big discount out, and until next time, thank you for watching.